know that programs and projects, new programs take resources. And we know that at the end of the day, if we don't have resources, we can't do our ministries. And how important is that for us? So this afternoon, we have a panel discussion that's going to focus on our reality of combining the power of the Holy Spirit, time, people's passion, but always with the reality that we also need generous gifts and resources in order to do our work. So we have 3 experts who are here with us today, and I'm so excited to introduce them. We have Brenda Moore of Brenda Moore and Associates, Mike Ward from GSB Fundraising, and we have our very own Sarah Gilday, who is our Director of Philanthropy. Please give them a very warm welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have had a tremendous morning. I don't know about you, but it has been so inspiring, the conversations that I've had with many of you, and we are looking forward to an even better afternoon. So, as Charlotte mentioned, I am the Director of Philanthropy at Siebert Lutheran Foundation, a position I feel so incredibly blessed to hold. God has called me to this position at this chapter in my life where I get to use my fundraising skills as well as my lifelong Lutheran faith. So I am really honored to be facilitating this discussion with 2 people I would say are some of the best in the business. And first, Mike is managing partner of GSB. He works with congregations and church agencies and institutions like camps and social service agencies. He specializes in annual fund and capital campaigns. In November, Mike and his business partner, Mitzi Schaefer, also began serving as interim co-CEOs for Novus Way Ministries to lead a financial turnaround. And Brenda has spent 30 years serving both small and large not-for-profits, most notably as Vice President for Advancement at Gustavus Adolphus College and Director of Development at her alma mater, Concordia College, Moorhead. Brenda and the Siebert Lutheran Foundation have partnered to develop a major giving cohort program for a select group of Siebert Foundation grantees, some of who are here today, who are ready to make a larger impact. Welcome to you both. Let's just hear it for both of them. Thank you. So as we transition into this afternoon's discussion on financial vitality, I just want to take a moment to reflect on the rich conversations we've already had today about vitality in ministry. You heard Charlotte talk earlier about vitality, calling it it's the power of enduring. And it's not just about having the energy, enthusiasm, or innovation to pursue our missions. It's more than that. It really requires resources to sustain it. And that brings us to the critical intersection, the relationship between financial vitality and ministry vitality. So today we've explored what makes a ministry vibrant and impactful. However, while we recognize financial vitality is essential, can a ministry be vital without being financially robust? Our goal in this discussion is to connect the dots based on what you've heard and already seen today. And I just challenge you to walk away with 3 ideas for moving your organization's mission forward and 3 practical strategies for creating financial vitality. So, let's dive in and make sure that you leave today's session equipped with actionable ideas that blend visionary mission goals with strategic financial support. And I know it's after lunch, but first we're going to get started with getting your thoughts. So we have a poll here. You can scan that with your QR code or go to that website there. What we're going to get your thoughts on how you would define financial vitality. So please enter your thoughts there. How would you define financial vitality? It might be diverse revenue sources. It might be if you ended the year with a budget surplus or lean expenses or a balanced budget, steady unrestricted revenue. Let's see what you think. Very good. Able to make payroll without stress. Good one. Not being consumed by what we lack. Yep. Clear vision. Excellent. Sustainable generosity, good. Surplus, I agree with all of these. It needs to be done with hospitality. Oh, I like that one. Not having to worry when unexpected events, because we all know that happens, right? When unexpected events occur or a funding source is no longer funding. Steady flow of income, all very good, excellent. Don't know what that one is. So, all right. Brenda, we're going to get started with you. We've had a lot of really good responses here of faithful offerings. Oh, I like that one of what God has given us. So we've got some really good responses from the audience here. And let's start with, what does it look like to have financial vitality? So no matter the budget, what commonalities make these organizations financially healthy?
Well, maybe the question before that is, when we get there, will we recognize it? Because I sometimes think that we got a vision of what that looks like, and maybe it's even right under our nose. I mean, one of the things that God does promise us is that we'll have more than enough and more to share with others for every good work, right? So I do think I agree with a lot of the things that I'm seeing here. We're going to touch on some of those as a part of our conversation, but I kind of want to go back to what Charlotte was saying. It's this notion that that we are able to endure, and I don't mean that in any negative kind of sense, but it's this notion that we can see the future together, that we're being led into a future that we can share. I think resiliency is a huge part of our financial vitality. It was kind of fun to be in one of the small groups, one of the workshops, where we talked about what that looked like as individuals to be able to be resilient. And so to me, it's resilience, it's that ability to adapt. I think it looks like a lot of the congregations and institutions that I would say recovered from COVID perhaps more quickly than others, or congregations and institutions that went into COVID and managed to maintain momentum. And one of the commonalities that I saw with those organizations was that many of them, let's just be practical here, had reserves. Many of them had endowments. They didn't have to wait for their PPP money in order to keep moving forward. Maybe the most important thing I saw was congregations and organizations who could make an abrupt shift and still maintain great personal relationships with the people who they couldn't see now on a day-to-day basis. And so I look back to that period and say, wow, the organizations and churches that came out of COVID with steam, I would recognize as being resilient, as being vital.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Brenda. I think another thing that comes to mind, Brenda, when as you were talking, I was also thinking about COVID and how that challenged us all to be resilient. Mm-hmm. It also taught us about coming from a place of abundance. And you mentioned those that did have money in reserves, I think found themselves in a much better place. They were coming from a place of abundance. Mike, can you talk about what our faith tells us about a feeling of abundance? And in faith-based organizations like we all are, how does the philosophy of abundance shape our approach to financial decisions and strategies?
Sure. So my first call, I was 3.5 years in a parish. In 3.5 years, I got to endure 2 capital campaigns. And I say endure, and I actually say suffered through, because they failed to inspire. And with the lack of inspiration, we believe the steps to a gift are to inform, inspire, ask, and thank. And when you skip the inspire piece, when you only inform and ask, people think you just wanted their money. And that's really not what the church is about. That's really not what church agencies and institutions are about. And so I knew it had to be better, but I didn't know exactly how at the time. What our faith tells us about that, I like to go to Jesus' words in Matthew 6:21. If Jesus is right, which is a fun way to start a sentence, if Jesus is right, that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That when we're talking about fundraising, we're talking about matters of the heart. Mm-hmm. And if the majority of Protestant Christians give less than 1% of their income away, then we're engaging this conversation as a matter of the heart, a matter of their faith journeys with those folks. We also like to go to the first article of the Apostles' Creed. We say it every Sunday. We know that, in front of this group, I'm only going to paraphrase a little bit. We know that what Luther says about the first article is that essentially what it means to say, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, is that God has provided and continues to provide for us day to day. Therefore, what we have isn't ours. We're simply stewards of it, and we have the great privilege to give it back. And so the spiritual side of giving really kind of leads into some of that inspiration piece, that it's not out of obligation, it's out of opportunity to expand the kingdom of God and to be connected to what God's up to in the world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mike. As we asked the audience there about what financial vitality meant, I think someone had said being able to adapt when unexpected events occur, which kind of brings us to the thought of making sure not to rely too heavily on one funding source. Mm-hmm. So our next question for the audience is, what percentage of your revenue comes from one source? Pop up that percentage in there, because that can sometimes create some issues of having of being financially stable and having vitality if you are dependent too much upon one source. 99%.
Wow.
Very interesting. 20%. Mm-hmm. 7. And by one source, that might be one particular individual, that might be one foundation, that might be your one revenue source might be strictly on government funding. So if you're wondering how to answer that, one source, God.
There's the good theological answer.
And we anticipated some might say, I have no idea. And we had discussed that and thought, that's a good opportunity to go back and after this discussion, add that to your list of something that you're going to find out. So we, in industry standard, Brenda will talk about this, recommend no more than about 20% comes from one source. And Brenda, can you talk about what constitutes a healthy mix of diverse revenue streams, and how does this contribute to financial vitality?
These are some of the questions that you almost don't dare answer, because there are lots of different schools of thought about this. But let's kind of take this in two pieces. First of all, let's look at the total budget of your organization. If you're a church, odds are 99%, 90% of your income comes from gifts, right? So already you feel kind of vulnerable when you don't have resources like from program revenues and things of that nature. But then, depending on the kind of nonprofit you are, that pie could look very different. I know, and you've seen a lot of the Bible camp audits too. We've probably sat through many of those audits, where we see in something like a camping organization, a really healthy revenue mix would look like about 50 to 60% of the revenues coming from program revenue, and then approximately 40% coming from charitable gift revenue, and maybe there'd be a percentage also coming from investment revenue. So just when you look at total revenue, that mix can vary from one organization to the next. I think it's important to kind of understand what that best practice looks like in your industry, if you will. It's easier to name when it's a congregation, a little bit trickier depending on the other type of nonprofit you are. But there's something to knowing what that ideal mix could look like and having some aspiration to make your plans around that. But now take that to the next level, and let's just look at what charitable gift revenue looks like. Because I think as the church, especially in congregational life, we've been way too dependent on the offering plate, on regular, ongoing, week-to-week, month-to-month gifts for a long, long time. What we're sharing with you today is a slide from an organization called Giving USA. Every year they publish this data, and it helps us appreciate where gifts come from. And the important thing that Mike and I and Sarah want you to learn from this is that the lion's share of giving comes from individuals. If you look at this slide, you can see it says 64% of giving is coming from individuals. But that's not quite true. You see a couple of other sources here. Giving by bequests, 9%. Well, who gives bequests? Individuals. They direct those, right? A bequest is a gift that people leave at death. Okay, kind of a fancy word, but that's what that is. Now, there's another big chunk here called giving by foundations. And the first thing we think of are wonderful foundations like Siebert, okay? But this slice of the pie has grown, it's almost doubled in the last, 10 to 15 years? Because of something called the Donor Advised Fund. And I hope and pray that you are all receiving gifts from people's donor-advised funds. Donor-advised funds make up about half of that pie. Who is making gifts to donor-advised funds? Individuals. So now we can see that it truly is the individual that is directing probably 85% of that pie. And so if you go home and you take a look at your gift income, and now suddenly you decide or you see that you are too heavily dependent on foundations and organizations and not dependent enough on individuals, that's probably a significant opportunity for a course correction because individuals are where it's at.
Mm-hmm. We certainly see that at Siebert as well as things change in our congregation landscape and organizations that have become quite dependent on gifts from congregations. That has been a struggle to replace that revenue source, or when foundations decide to leave the state or change their giving priority or close their door. That is a pretty big chunk of that pie that you can no longer become dependent on. And it is very difficult to just quickly adapt when individual relationships can take 12 to 18 months to develop before that gift. So you cannot wait until you get the news that this funding source has dissolved. You have to be doing that work all the time.
So just to summarize, the key here, the point we're trying to make, is that you want to diversify your revenue streams as much as you can, because it's in diversifying those revenue streams that you have a safety net, whether those revenue streams are through gift income, through your endowment, through your reserve. Kind of important to take that very seriously.
Mike, I'd like to talk a little bit about alternative revenue sources, which I find quite exciting and is another way of diversifying revenue, because I know you've worked with organizations that are pursuing other non-traditional sources for generating revenue, and sometimes it's because they don't want to fundraise. Not everyone loves making the ask, and other times it is to identify alternative funding. And can you talk about some of these other revenue sources and an example of an organization that is successfully raising revenue from an alternative source?
Sure, and truly it is, we want to diversify revenue, but not from the standpoint of so that we don't have to fundraise anymore, because when we do fundraise, we are growing friends to the ministries that we're part of, they become our advocates, they expand our mission, and well, Brenda just showed you the slide that explains where the revenue comes from. By the way, during the break, I talked to a client who gets 38% of their revenue from a single household as a church.
Okay.
We talked about diversifying revenue, so it is a very relevant conversation. When we look at diversifying revenue, though, we need to make sure we align with our mission. And we don't just chase money for the sake of chasing money, because it will water down our mission. It will spread us so thin that we won't be good at our core any longer. And so I lift that up as a roadblock that we want to avoid. So what are we good at? You know, I do a lot of work with camps. Camps are pretty good at lodging and food service. Find other groups to do your lodging and food service and make sure your product aligns with what the market is looking for with those kinds of things, instead of trying to run a thrift store, which you have no experience in, no ability to do, and it's going to divert you from getting other people that are your core mission to come and do your lodging and food service. So we don't want to go that route. And just because it worked for somebody else doesn't mean it's a great idea for you. So I have some camps in North Carolina, and they have a vibrant environmental education program. So the camp in Florida said, well, we ought to do that because it's working in North Carolina, and they tried it. Well, in the standard course of study in North Carolina is environmental education because the state legislature there supports it. In Florida, they don't. And so just because it works in one place doesn't mean it works in your place and for what you're looking to do. If you're a camp or you own a lot of property, conservation easements are great. Solar farms are great. If you're generating revenue from solar, you're basically creating a new revenue stream. I've got a dining hall I'd like to put solar on to save $18,000 a year, which to me would be a new revenue stream at the camp that I'm leading. We had staff that didn't quite have the ability to fill 40 hours that we wanted to be able to provide full-time work. So we outsourced them to a local private school that needed some housekeepers. We charged them 2 times their salary. We made a little bit of money off the effort. Our housekeeper continued their work, and the school got to be a partner, and the school's now sending us day camp kids. So it kind of becomes a win-win when you start to send those kinds of things out. And there's benefits and pitfalls. The benefit is we lead into revenue diversity. Right now, the camp I'm at, we're down on summer campers, but we're ahead on retreat revenue. We're ahead on non-summer camp revenue. We're ahead on family camp. We're going to be okay because we've got that diversity flowing. If we were totally reliant on summer camp, I'd probably be laying myself off today and going back to my other job. So, but the pitfall is we start to chase these other revenue sources and we start to deteriorate our core mission. Sometimes I see this in churches where we overdevelop the social ministry at the expense of worship and faith formation. And we need to make sure that, like, a lot of social ministry can be outsourced and just join another organization currently doing it and let them do it well because that's where their expertise is, rather than starting something from scratch and focus on your core alongside. So I don't know if it's a conundrum, but it's something that we need to hold in tension as we move forward.
Is there one question you think organizations should ask themselves before they decide to move forward on pursuing an alternative source?
So do we have the capacity to pull this off with who we are as people?
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So I don't know about the audience, but how often have we encountered this mindset? We've always done it that way. And we're a denomination that believes in death and resurrection, yet sometimes we're reluctant to let things die. So what innovative approaches have you seen that challenge this norm or a situation where letting it die led to sustainability?
Yeah, so I phrase that we believe in death and resurrection, but we don't let anything die all the time, because the church loves to just pile on and loves to water us down. One of the transformative experiences of my life, I listened to a podcast on Hidden Brain called Do Less. You might want to write that one down and take that one with you. It talks about pruning. It talks about what we can get rid of so that we can do other things even better. We often hear that people get mad when you start talking about letting something die. What they're mad about is that the church isn't living into vitality. They're not mad about the thing. They're mad about the loss of vitality. And they just need to see that there might be an alternative way to get there. So in November, when my colleague Mitzi and I got the opportunity to be co-CEOs of this camp, we had to do less. And we immediately cut about $900,000 out of the budget, which meant a lot of hard decisions and a lot of people. But we had people because, we've always had an executive director at every camp. Well, but you only had 160 campers this year. Just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean it's still the right way to do it. So we've begun to let some positions die, let some things change, and we've yoked camps to take the gifts of somebody who really knows how to do maintenance at one place, and they can supervise the maintenance at the other. One can lead, we're not leading programs every day of the year at all sites. We can share that amongst each other. And have we always done it that way? No, but we had to let that die for the sake of the organization actually surviving. And I would tell you that, in my opinion, we're doing better ministry right now than we were before, when we had, too many people just not living up to what they needed to be doing. Outside the camp world, we're working with a church in New York right now that They never asked their members to grow in giving. They launched a social ministry agency for aging populations, and they ran a preschool operation. And pre-pandemic, apparently they were making money. We haven't seen that in their budget reports yet, but they claimed that they were making money then. They're currently burning through a ridiculous amount of money that it will, if they continue, it will result in all three organizations shutting down. And what they've done is they're starting to lead outside of their area of expertise. And so we said, well, kill it. Kill those senior services, kill the preschool from the perspective of you running them. You've still got the space for it, but you obviously don't have the expertise to do this efficiently and appropriately. And so they'll be outsourcing that, and they'll actually increase their revenue because people who know how to do that, who have the efficiencies of scale, will take that over and then pay rent. So where it was a loss, it becomes a benefit. And they can actually put their energy and focus into worship and faith formation and reaching out to the community in different ways instead of balancing budgets and figuring out how the transportation system works that's currently losing $18,000 a year, which is really not the mission of this organization. Yeah, do less.
Brenda, you had mentioned, COVID earlier, and, as we're talking about letting things die, I think out of COVID came a lot of things that we needed to let die, and one of them was events. And I was asked to talk about some best event planning strategies at an Association of Fundraising Professionals annual meeting back in December, and I started with, if you can do anything else, don't do an event, because it takes too much work and you only raise about 50 cents on every dollar. And so that, I think we saw coming out of COVID, was one thing a lot of organizations let die, is in-person events, and found that they could raise that same amount from individuals without having that event. Mike also had just talked about efficiencies, and you gave some great examples, Mike. Brenda, can you talk about some tools or strategies for creating efficiencies in managing tight budgets within our organization?
I'm going to speak first from strategy, then from tools, and we're actually going to use this slide in a few minutes. There's a few things I think we need to normalize in our organizations, whether we're churches or nonprofits. And one of the things I think we need to normalize is conversations and accountability to being the stewards of money, period. Most people don't come to our organizations with a great deal of financial literacy, and yet financial literacy and an understanding of what my budget is and how I can steward my budget and how I'm going to set goals around my budget and what that looks like for the whole organization is one of the most liberating, truth-telling things we can do. We have to normalize conversations about money around our leadership tables at our churches and in our nonprofits and at home too, right? And so what does that look like? It looks like staff and board having tools, metrics on a regular basis to really understand what's going on. So there's transparency, no secrets, no surprises. That doesn't have to be an overwhelming thing. Having a dashboard with 3 to 5 great metrics that you look at the beginning of your staff meeting every week is an indicator. It's a picture of how we're all doing, and it gives you the chance to celebrate when we're doing well and to speak very factually and truthfully when we've got work to do. So to me, normalizing money and then the tools that you need are just some really basic metrics. This would be true for boards as well. And then the other thing that I think we need to normalize is that development work, fundraising work, is everybody's work. It's not just the person responsible for the revenue, but it is the person who is at the front door, who is welcoming and greeting people and making them feel welcomed and like they are loved here. It's the staff person who does impeccable work, who every person they serve can see their joy in that work and feels like they are giving their best and would want to support that best. It's everybody in the culture being able to say thank you. It's everybody in the culture being able to identify a potential donor so that as there are opportunities, you don't lose out on them. And so what are some of, that's kind of the strategy side. The tools for that, more and more, even congregations have got something that we in the nonprofit world have long used, and that is something we call a CRM, a constituent relationships management tool. It's our donor database. It's how we track and manage the relationships that we have with people so that as it's time to recruit leaders, time to engage people, and then eventually time to invite them to give, we've got a system, and it's not a bunch of institutional memory that leaves as people die or move to a new organization. If you haven't figured out how to have a tool like that in your organization, whether you're really small or really large, then we would have some ideas for them, wouldn't we? Yeah. So those are just a couple of things I think of for strategies and tools.
I like that you say fundraising is everyone's job. We've certainly been at organizations, I'm sure, where that has not been the culture, or when there is a tight budget, it's the fundraising amount is the number you just put in. It's an arbitrary number that you just put in the budget to help fill that gap without the perspective of how many donors are we talking to, or in the pipeline, let's say, how many prospects do we have? Are we replacing donors as fast as we're losing them? It's a very thoughtful process that everybody needs to be a part of, and not just a number we put in to balance the budget. Brenda, I hear you talk often about non-cash assets, and can we shift gears a little bit, and can you share how organizations can better leverage non-cash assets?
Sure. Now we're going to get into these buckets that you see in front of you. And if I had one more slide, it would be an offering plate. We don't see these very often anymore. Let's stay with the buckets. But again, as people who have been doing church for a long time, our thought about what giving looked like was whatever happened in the offering plate when it came by. And it was usually cash or a check, right? In fact, sometimes, back in the day, we even had pledge cards that asked us to state the portion of our income, the whole notion of proportionate giving, the proportion of our income that we were going to share with our church that year. Well, if we're only talking to people about their income, we're barely scratching the surface of what they have to give. So one of the things we want to teach you about this afternoon are these two buckets. On average, an American has about 10% of their wealth in cash or through their income, and about 90% of their wealth in assets. Now, depending on how young you are or how old you are, that could mean very different things to you. It took me quite a few years before I could see that, yeah, there's 90% in assets. It's called savings. But we never think about and never speak about the beautiful ways that people can gift from their assets. And so that's really what Sarah is asking about. Can we go to the next slide here? Let's recognize one other phenomenon. So the first is people have much more to give in general if we can ask them and invite gifts from their assets. Now, let's also take a look at bequests. Remember the 9% of that pie that we looked at? So we're gonna teach this lesson from these jars, okay? If you see that jar in the middle, let's say that jar is the average amount of gift income that we see in this country from bequests. That's 9% of all giving that comes from bequests. That full jar, those are the people who've been talking about planned giving for a long time. And typically these are our colleges, our hospital foundations. They've been very overt and intentional about inviting people to leave legacy gifts for decades now. And in most of their cases, they're getting 20% of their income each year from bequests. So if they're getting 20% and the average is 10, then what's left in that little jar? That's what I see happening in churches and in faith-based organizations. We haven't been inviting bequests. And so it's the pittance in that little jar that we've been realizing. If you're not receiving, on average, 9 or 10% a year from bequests in your organization, that should be your first signal that you've got a problem and that you're not creating opportunities for people to support you with legacy gifts. So that's a matter of urgency. We're in the midst of this great wealth transfer, and important for us to start getting serious about helping people give their assets during life and also at death. It's another way of approaching those diverse income streams.
Pretty staggering reality when you look at it that way, and we all know that for most of us that would be the biggest gift we'd ever be able to make, is one upon our death, much, much bigger, 10 times bigger than we could ever make in our lifetime. And if you're going back to your office and you're looking at how much you have to raise this year, and you're looking at that number, you're looking at that budget, and then the phone rings and you've got a full inbox because you've been here today, it's overwhelming, right? The amount of work that we have to do, and sometimes it's just about all we can do in our positions just to meet that number every year that we have to raise. So let's just break that down a little bit easier. And we know focusing on bequests is important, but what are 3 actionable items organizations can go back and take this year to engage potential legacy donors?
Great question. Great question. Let's just rattle these 3 things off because you can't do it all. The first thing is just go home and identify who these people probably are, okay? This is a quick snapshot of some of the assets that people can give. And so if you can identify people who have a retirement fund, that would be an awful lot of people in your circle, right? Real estate, stock, these are assets that people can gift at life and at death. And if you've got people who are already giving these gifts, you should pay attention because there's usually more where they came from. But the other thing you should be looking for are others who are potential planned gift prospects. First and foremost, surprisingly or not, they're people without children. People without heirs are like at least 2 times more likely to leave a gift at the end of life to your organization. But they also aren't necessarily people with wealth. They're people who have loyalty. That's the number 1 indicator. So start identifying who they are and could be. And then the second thing you want to do is develop personal relationships with them. You want to connect with them. And you can even begin integrating this question into the conversations you have with them. I think the question that I've always shared is this. It's at the end of the conversation, and you've thanked someone for seeing you, and you've thanked them for the wonderful commitment that they've just made, and now you can simply ask, Ethel, you've been so incredibly loyal all these years. Have you ever considered including St. John's Lutheran Church in your will? Now you start the conversation, okay? And then the third thing is that you just have to normalize this kind of giving in your communications. You need to be talking about it as much as you would talk about any other form of giving. So those would be the 3 things. Identify the people, start having visits, normalize it in your communication.
We mentioned the major giving cohort that you and I both work on at Siebert Lutheran Foundation, where this year we have 5 of our grantee partners, and we have seen that just by putting information about making a planned gift in newsletters and in email signature, making that part of a conversation. Some of our grantee partners have made incredible strides in opening up that conversation. But it can be intimidating, can't it, to start these conversations about making a bequest if it's not something that's become part of your regular vocabulary. If somebody is somewhat apprehensive, they've done maybe the easy part there, what would you say about that apprehension of, how am I going to talk with somebody about making a gift upon their death?
I'm going to let you answer that one because I've been doing all the talking the last 5 minutes.
I'm going to say, will you join me in making a gift through your estate to this organization that we both love and care for? That's the easiest way to do it. If you're not willing to do it yourself, I don't know why anybody else would. And so at Lutheridge, one of the camps, we've got a residential section. We spoke to them last week. I looked at him and I said, you know, one of the ways we're going to keep this strong in the long term is if you'll join me in making an estate gift. Yours will come sooner, I hope. But I think you're also more likely to live longer. I've got somebody that's currently 102 because she left an estate gift to us.
Yes.
But anyway, it's the join me culture.
It is. Absolutely. Absolutely. And honestly, this is the work that there are volunteers and leaders in your organization who can get that far in this conversation. You don't have to be an expert to start the conversation. We're going to talk in a few minutes about what that team looks like, but people who are comfortable having conversations about financial things, and it's usually not your pastor, and it may not be other leaders, but you've got lots of people who have had professional careers in money, who are part of your organization, and they would be very comfortable having starting this conversation and having the Join Me conversation to at least get it started.
We just had those conversations at Siebert at the beginning of the year, and the conversations started off as, is that something that you might consider as you rewrite your will, or if you have one, it could really just giving permission to, can we continue to have that conversation with you? And if you don't have a will now, but you're going to be, can we come back and talk with you when you are? Will you let us know when it is a good time? And I can say in 100% of those cases, everyone left the door open to continue that conversation. So there's a very easy way to, if you're feeling somewhat some intimidation and trepidation, that's a pretty easy opener, a question to have. Is that something you've considered, and can we keep in touch with you about that?
Yep, absolutely.
So here's some creative ways that people have found of raising more money and balancing their budget. And I'm just going to ask you to weigh in on these, okay? And just feel free to speak freely. How about you're facing a budget shortfall? What are your thoughts on starting a GoFundMe campaign just right off the bat to try to raise significant dollars? Go ahead.
No.
No? Oh. How about starting a brand new labor-intensive special event, something we've never done before?
You can do that.
Nope.
Okay. How about we just say, here's our strategy. If everyone's going to give $100 more, we're going to be okay.
No.
No, not that one. Oh, so how about the committee or the board is sitting around and they're saying, well, what if we just write to a really big donor? You know, we write to Mackenzie Scott or the Gates Foundation or Oprah. Would you recommend that strategy? Writing a letter?
No.
Oh, and last one, how about hiring a development director that's going to come in with their network and all their contacts and save the day?
No.
Nope.
Oh. Well, Mike, you're up. Summarize these ideas and why not?
The first step wasn't the join me culture. The first step is this is somebody else's problem, and it's not somebody else's problem. If we want others to join us, we need to lead. That's what leadership is. And doesn't mean you're the most significant financial gift, but you're the most significant leader. And so I don't go to that major donor until I can say, you know what, this is so important. Every member of our board has chosen to make an additional gift this year, and now we're hoping you'll join us. The answer isn't to hire somebody at $75,000 a year to raise $35,000 a year. That exasperates the problem in the first couple of years, especially where there's no history. That's the old, somebody else can do this, and I don't want it to be my job. We need to create, we talk all the time, we need to create join me cultures. And I took too many calls during this conference. Another call I had with somebody was, I'm going to send a letter. I'm going to send the letter out that says, we're just not doing enough. And I said, well, hang on a second. Let's find out why we're not doing well enough. I said, how many of your top donors died or moved away last year? Oh, we had 6. It's not that big of a congregation. I said, well, on an annual basis, what's their giving Well, about 60,000 a year. What are you short? Oh, we're down 15,000 already. Or no, I'm sorry, they were down 12,000. I said, well, actually, your people have stepped up beyond what you've lost. If you follow that math, it really works, trust me. So the messaging was going to be all wrong. The messaging was going to be, you poor saps, can't you do any better?
Right.
When in fact that audience has already increased their generosity, and they need the understanding of why it is we're in the situation we're in. They need the inspiration that the ministry is making great strides, and that you're not in danger of being the last person to ever give to this organization before it closes its doors, which we inadvertently do far too often.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody wants to be the last one, and no one wants to feel like they're the only one and that no one is joining them in that effort, that it's all up to them. Yep. It's a big weight to carry. We were chatting earlier, you had kind of a revolutionary idea that you don't necessarily have to have a dedicated development person. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that and how organizations can be successful without having a professional in that position of a development person?
I probably would never start an organization in fundraising with a paid staff person. The best fundraiser is peer-to-peer. The most likely person to give is the person that looks like the person already giving. And so I would create a development council or alumni team or whatever it may be of people who are passionate and care to begin to expand it to their networks. Don't get me wrong, there may come the day when you get to hire a full-time or a part-time or $1 a year type professional paid staff person, but it takes time to prove concept. And so I would first prove concept. And you're going to raise more money when people are opening up their networks and inviting their friends to say, hey, join me in this. It's worth it. You won't be the only one, and it's making a difference in the world.
Brenda, can you share a little bit about this same question?
Yeah, I think I'm going to preface this by saying how important it is in order to be successful in this fundraising work to actually have a plan and a realistic plan, and not a plan that has you running in 100 different directions, but a plan that really has you focusing, especially, again, if you're smaller, on doing a few things very, very well. And so let's just name some of the high ROI fundraising things that are out there. And the reason we jest about some of these ideas is because things like events are, maybe you're lucky if there's 50 cents on the dollar. But in good major and plan giving work, even if professionals are involved, now we're only talking about a 10-cent cost on a $1 return, right? This is where there's the highest potential for you to focus and get a significant kind of result. And then I think in the whole world of annual fund, now it's the dependence on recurring giving. That's like continuous money in the bank. What a great way to be thinking about helping people sustain your ministry. And this is another higher ROI piece. And then if you are going to be pursuing foundations and corporations, congregations, strategic. Pick and choose only the ones, and don't forget, it's actually individuals making those decisions. So those relationships need to be key. But let's talk a little bit about this particular slide and who can be on your team for good fundraising, because we have this false notion that it's a wizard called a fundraiser who has a magic wand, and ultimately in this join me culture, it's this whole team of people and more. So I've already said a little bit about how your entire staff can be engaged in this work if they understand what role they can play in order to cultivate great relationships and help people get engaged and be grateful and thankful. But there are other roles that some staff can play, and it's a lot of the infrastructure kinds of steps. And so if you've got a great bookkeeper, why are they not doing, they could also be doing some of the gift receiving stewardship work there. Anyway, I won't say much more about staff. We've mentioned them already. Let's talk about contractors for a minute. Now, most of the organizations I've worked with have wondered if they could contract out like this major gift person. It's also a wizard that they think that they can bring in and function more like a hitman, right? The truth is, you can contract out just about everything else in fundraising. You can contract out grant writing. I mean, we live in a gig economy more than we ever have, right? You can find people who can write your grants. You can find people who can do your gift processing and manage your thank you notes. You can find marketing people who will write great social media posts and write your articles and talk about your organization. You can find people who'll write your annual fund letters. But what you really can't farm out are the relationships. It's the individual relationships that either as executive director or as lead pastor, you just have to have with people in order for this to be, not just to raise money, but for this to be holy work. Ultimately, the holy work happens when we're sitting down and having this conversation about our faith and what it means for us to feel grateful and how it is that we want to provide for the future of the kingdom of God here. So you can contract lots of things out, but don't contract out the stuff that depends on the relationships. Advisors. So almost all of us are connected to a church body where we've got somebody in an office called gift planner for a foundation. I was in that role once, and I think all of us in those roles have realized how terribly underutilized we can be. They are your partners. There are partners here through the Milwaukee Community Foundation and through other foundations. Your financial advisors whose faith informs their decision to be helping people make important stewardship decisions about their wealth. Those are people who can be on your team. And the last thing I'll mention is board, or this could be your church council. They should probably be the first listing on this screen. And why? Because it's your board, your church council that has the fiduciary duty for your organization and for its mission. And one of the most important things you should be doing is orienting your board and your church council to help them understand that this is their role to resource your ministry. And again, equipping them to be able to say, join me. That's a whole nother lecture. But board and church council, absolutely on the team. And if you are all working together, you can do this work. And you can do it much better than you're already doing it, I'm sure.
You can't underestimate the importance of a strong board. It is likely the #1 key determinant that I have seen between not-for-profits that I've worked at, CBER grantee partners, that if there is a strong, engaged board that is actively involved in fundraising, I have yet to see that they aren't also financially vital as well and strong in their revenue generation. So.
Absolutely.
Mike, we've seen donors' expectations evolve and change. I hear donors talking more and more about impact and outcomes. Of course, stories are also very important, but they want to see these tangible outcomes, and they want to be assured, as you said, that they're not the only donor, that they're not the last donor. They want to feel that we're not separating them from their assets, but that we're connecting them with their faith and building a relationship. So how can organizations meet these expectations and build meaningful relationships?
Well, certainly the first thing is we can actually talk to our donors. That's a great step one in building those relationships rather than just taking them for granted. Doesn't necessarily mean you treat a donor better than anybody else that you would treat, but you do honor them and pay attention to them. I'm finding today our donors to churches, church-related agencies, institutions are willing to give more than they were pre-pandemic. I haven't seen the study to this effect you may have, but I think our church people are giving to less organizations and giving more to care for our faith communities. And that's a great thing. We're also seeing more people willing to leave that estate gift. Pre-pandemic, we were happy if 1 out of 10 people would say that they had or they were open to leaving an estate gift to a church or a church institution. I recently had 70% of people in a feasibility study. It's phenomenal, the opportunity. So everything she said about planned giving, I hope you took notes and you'll actually work on that, because it is the future of our organizations, truly. Our donors do expect more outcomes. They expect us to be making a difference in the world. Most donors could care less about survival. They want to see impact. We talk about, we need to balance a budget. They don't care. They want to make an impact and and have an outcome. And so the stories that we tell need to be outcome-based stories, not accounting renditions, but stories that somebody's life was changed because of the work that we're doing. And honestly, that's the fun part of this job. Like, the fun part for me to be in this job, I mean, I'm goal-oriented and I love to hit a goal, don't get me wrong. But what I love most of all is I get to see what God is up to in the different ministries across our church, because that's what we need to be telling our donors. And so it's all about those outcome stories. Our donors need to know that others are committed. Again, they don't want to be the only one. They'll do their part as long as they feel like others are doing their part. We see in churches all the time, people kind of plateau at different giving levels because they do the math. Well, if everybody, I don't make as much money as most people and I'm given $1,000 a month, and if everybody was given $1,000 a month that's worth more than me, we'd have a budget 3 times this. So they want to know that they're not alone, or that there's a strategy to get other people to grow in that as well. And they want to know that they're not making the final gift to your organization. Again, it's not survival, it's thriving, and it's having that vision, and it's casting where we're going and how gifts will help us to get there, and where the positive momentum is. And my mentor in generosity, when I was marketing and fundraising at the camps a dozen years ago, he said, "Mike, screw up." Am I allowed to say that here? He said, "But learn from it." And he gave me money every year to try things, because he was so desperate to see the church thrive, and he was tired of nobody trying anything. He gave us $100,000 a year to try stuff, and the only string attached to that was that I learned from my mistakes. So that was so freeing, and taught me more than anything had in a long time, to be able to have that freedom. That's what donors wanted. They didn't just want to survive. They wanted to advance the kingdom of God and to see that happening here.
Wow, that's powerful. What a gift to be able to be a risk taker, and to have that permission.
And I messed up plenty. It was great.
We all do. At one of our cohort sessions recently, I said, I'm going to tell you all of the mistakes that I have made in talking with donors, because I want you to understand it's okay. We're all going to make those mistakes, and you learn from them. And I'm going to tell you that I've made them so you can all feel better going out into the world and having those conversations. Lastly, Mike, you talked a little bit about transparency. Can you just tell us one thing organizations can do to improve their transparency and their financial stewardship?
Just one thing?
If you've got, maybe I'll give you 2.
All right. First, let's not make up a crisis. All right. The crisis letters do work. But if you manufacture one every year, then people start to not believe it and think you're just kind of making things up. If you're a church in particular, don't lie about being behind. If you always get 23% of your income in December, don't tell people you're behind in January when you didn't get, equal amounts each month. So share the stories of generosity, that Join Me piece. Share your vision and your outcomes. And then do things that show people that you're really paying attention. So the camps that I'm leading now, they burned through $2.5 million in 2 years, which is, I don't know your context, but that's a lot of money in this context. First thing I did was I brought in a Lutheran CPA who used to work for Ernst & Young to come in and look at things. And you know what I did? I told everybody about Brian and his background and what he was doing, what he was finding, and how we were changing the system. We didn't hide behind it and pretend that we were great, because we weren't great. What we did is we had that transparency, that accountability, and we proved that we were changing it. And then I made a gift, and I asked people to join me in supporting the organization. And my mom gave it a gift, and I told people that even my mom is supporting it, so you can, it is now safe for you to join us as well, because I wouldn't do that to my own mother, right?
Ask your mom to support every organization now? Your moms get pretty tired, huh?
If I'm leading it, yeah.
Oh, you have a great mom then. I hope you remembered her on Sunday for that.
I took her to lunch.
Yeah.
I took her to lunch.
So we're going to give all of you a chance to ask some questions. So if we want to, put the question slide up there. So while you're thinking of any questions that you have for Brenda, for Mike, for me, what's that?
She's giving me the first one.
Oh, you get the first one? We've already got some questions. Okay. The first one is, do you believe that pastors should be aware of the individual giving amounts of donors to their church? Oh, I love this question because I've often wondered the same thing. Brenda, you're taking this one, or Mike's got it? Mike, you're up.
I am told that if you Google me plus should the pastor know, you will find a YouTube video of me being pretty blunt on this topic. Yes. The answer is yes. Because again, if Jesus is right, or that where your treasure is, your heart will be also. That's what Matthew 6:21 says, that it is a matter of the heart. And if the pastor doesn't know, how do we ever know the story that we're behind on giving because our top donor left or died? How are we able to accurately communicate? From a practical standpoint, a pastor in South Carolina found out that his number one donor was by dollar amount was leaving. And I said, well, Shannon, you got nothing to lose. Go ask the donor if they wouldn't continue 3/4 of their giving this year, half their giving the following year, and 1/4 of their giving the following year to wean you off of it. And you know what the donor said? Yes. They wouldn't have gotten that resource had he not known and had they not asked. Right. Donor was happy to do it. The donor didn't want to kill the church on their departure. Donor wanted the best for the church. And that also opens up the planned giving conversation as well. So if we're good at what we pay attention to. And if we don't pay attention to what people are giving, not for the sake of treating anybody better than anybody else, or, don't come visit me 3 times a day and if I'm in the hospital because I give more or whatever. Treat me like a person, but, also, if you need people who know me, if you need a matching gift to send kids to camp, I'm probably a good candidate for such things, right? But if you don't know that about people, then you don't really know how to lead, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would say because pastors often are the ones that know what people's passions are, what they're excited about and passionate about giving too. Brenda, let's see, do you want to take
that? Yeah, it's how do we get people to give from their assets when so many people don't have assets, especially young people? So, first of all, when we start getting into asset-based giving, now we start getting into something that we call in the fundraising world segmentation. It's really important to learn how to personalize an appeal to different groups of people based on what their likelihood of being able to give is. And so we would have a very specific segment of people, for example, that we would work with if we were going to invite people to make gifts from their IRAs. Qualified charitable distributions can only be given by people who are 70 and a half and older. And so there's your segment right there. You would invite those kinds of gifts from that particular asset for that particular population. And the same would be true, obviously, gifts of real estate. It's going to be pretty obvious as to who those donors might be based on things you might know about maybe a second home or maybe some farmland. So we have to know a lot more about our donors before we invite these gifts, because these invitations, first of all, are a part of something we call, and I come from the farm, so this is a great word to me, it's cultivation. It's as we get to know the people who are our supporters, we learn, first of all, what they value, and we also learn about what they might have to give. And so we potentially can help them steer them towards some of these assets. But I also want to take the opportunity to kind of address a myth here, and that is that young people don't have assets. And let's talk specifically for a moment about stock. So if I were in a room of more mixed generations maybe not a room full of Lutherans, and we asked people, who of you owns stock? About half the room would raise their hand because we have it in our retirement portfolios, right? And then there would be this whole group of Gen Xers and millennials who have been trading online since it was an option. And we have so neglected this group of potential stockholders that we just assume they don't have the asset and they wouldn't be willing to gift it. And I wish I had the data right at my fingertips. Organizations like Free Will, if you follow them, can give you this data, but the ability of young people to make gifts of stock is far higher than you think. So don't assume that they don't have a great gift that they could give you.
And they will only have a greater ability as their parents age, and we're on the precipice of the greatest wealth transfer in the history. And I've seen amounts in the $2 trillion category there. So
12 trillion that will go to charity.
Yeah, so that ability is only going to get greater. I have a lot of questions in our last few
pick the ones
minutes
you think
here.
best to you.
I do like the one about innovation. I do often find, too, that people want to fund innovation. Can you talk a little bit about how we can talk to donors about funding budding leaders with passion and ideas and not just plans and details?
Your turn. I have a thought, but you turn.
Yeah, I would probably start with making sure that you have a plan before you talk to the donor, or have a conversation with the potential donor and create the plan together before you actually invite the gift. Because what you don't want to do is get a pot of money and then have no idea how to spend it and just waste it. And so, but I have found donors to be great partners in thinking things through. And many times our larger donors have had careers visioning a company and living into that vision, and they can approach, they need help translating church with that, but the principles they've learned can be very advantageous to us. So make them your partner as you would go to that, and have a conversation. Like, donors want what's best. If you get the conversation, you're over 90% of the way to the gift.
Exactly.
Embrace the conversation, don't rush the conversation, and actually probably think higher than you're thinking of donor capacity. That's one of the things we see most is folks underestimating the capacity of a donor to make a difference. We might ask for 5,000 where the donor was actually thinking 500,000. And so just be careful with how energetic they might get. Okay, talk to them, learn from them, listen to them, embrace it.
We're going to see how many, I want to get to as many as we can, so I'm going to kind of go rapid fire, see how many more we can get in here, because I think this is a good one with small congregations who would say that we don't have the privilege of membership or parishioners with deep pockets. What advice do you have for them?
So that congregation I told you about where one donor is giving 38%, I would classify as a small congregation.
Yes.
Last I heard, the couple was given $75,000. It wasn't the largest of congregations. I'd also be careful where I thought there was money and where there wasn't. I have learned a lot of times that I've been surprised numerous times in my life. So I do want to start there. At the same time, we haven't talked to our parishioners in language that many can understand. And so we talk in terms of, I'll keep it small church. We need $125,000 for our ministry this year. I don't have $125,000. What difference does that make? I'll just keep giving my $1 a day. Well, if we instead talk about we need to grow generosity by $500 a week, all of a sudden, if I double my $1 a day, I'm helping towards your $500 a week number, which is $26,000 a year, which is starting to get into big money. But we've brought it to a level that different people can understand, and different generation. We talked about young people, they get paid weekly or biweekly. That's a language they need. They don't need to hear that you have $1 million budget or even a $125,000 budget. So we need to make sure that we're talking language that relates to people regardless of the size of the congregation, honestly.
I saw one on there about, should each church council member be expected to give a minimum amount if they have regular income or assets?
Wanted that one?
Oh, you want that?
You want that one, yeah?
That's fine.
No. Everybody on the congregation council, though, should be invited and encouraged and required to give a gift significant according to their means. And they're not just giving their time. A gift, a financial gift significant according to your means should be the requirement on congregation council. If you run a hospital, yeah, they need to give a minimum gift. I'm sure your university had a minimum requirement, which is fine. It's a different animal. Yeah. Congregation council, a gift significant according to your means should be required.
Kind of on that note too, you know, this whole notion of what is your best gift, well, and what should boards and councils be expected to do? I think for years, you probably already know this, but kind of the rule of thumb when somebody is going to go into board service in your organization is that you would ask to be among their top 3 charitable priorities while they are serving your board. And that would be true for a church council as well, that during that time where you are leading, do have the fiduciary duty, you would also adjust your priorities to make your best gifts to those top 1, 2, or 3 organizations.
Yeah.
As well as the expectation is that 100% of the board give.
Yes.
It's not so much about the amount, but that you can go out into the community and say we will have 100%.
It's that join me culture.
Board giving. Well, we've just got a couple minutes yet, and let's conclude with the accessibility to some of the instruments for funding. And they're only accessible in some communities more than others. What can we do? How do we help them?
Boy, again, I think that there are certain people who are just servants in this arena, and you just need to ask a few questions. And not to put this all on you, but one of the things that you might forget if you are a beneficiary of funding from someplace like the Siebert Lutheran Foundation is that Sarah and Charlotte and the whole team are so well connected and so well networked. And if you need a referral to somebody who can help you, that's a place to start. The other place to start is, again, with your church body gift planner or maybe a local financial advisor. The other thing I want to remind you of is that the people who call themselves your members or who are your donors aren't necessarily your only constituency. So now kind of going back to this innovation piece, sometimes it's the new initiatives, the initiatives that are going to make a big impact now on your broader community and not just inside your organization. Perfect opportunity to be able to attract some new donors as well. And so if you have a hard time having enough donors to do your work, then networking is job number 1, and being able to ask the who do you know question. And you can start with other people who are in this work. I think we spend an awful lot of time just helping point people in the right direction and networking with people. And so if you want to start with any of us, you can.
Great. Well, didn't I tell you that they were 2 of the best in the business? I wasn't wrong. Let's hear it for Brenda and Mike. And if you wouldn't mind sharing one key takeaway, something that you're going to take away from this session. It might be prioritizing non-cash assets. It could be what can you outsource so that you can keep the relationships. It might be diversifying revenue or not manufacturing a crisis, or fundraising is up to all of us, or how you can facilitate a join me culture. Let's, as we close, kind of look at some of the things for the audience. We have a lot of, there we go, the join me culture and prioritizing legacy stories and gifts. Absolutely. You heard some of our stories here from Siebert as we started the day, some of people's why and why they decided to make their gift.